Oh yes, Santa Barbara, California.
What in the elite snobbery is this?
That was the historic Bella Squarto mansion, you idiot! How dare you associate that wonderful place with elite snobbery?
Alright, we'll try that one again. Take two.
Oh yes, Santa Barbara, California, where the weather is perfect year-round, and you get sunsets like this. But you also have a lot of this.
You can see homeless setting up shop in little shaded areas.
I mean, I'm not trying to say that the homeless problem is terrible here. There's definitely cities out there that see a much higher homeless population than Santa Barbara does, especially in the state that I'm currently in, but there's a little bit of a high homeless population here in Santa Barbara. I mean, we would all like to see that number be zero, and it's definitely present in Santa Barbara. That being said, is Santa Barbara the most overrated city in the country? Or does it live up to the hype? I guess we'll find out in this video. I begin the driving tour of Santa Barbara along Cabrillo Boulevard, which follows the beach east of downtown. We'll be staying mostly in the downtown area for this video, as this will be the first of 5 videos within my Santa Barbara series where I'll show you the entire city. The other 4 will be uploaded on my second channel called Chris Harden's Travel Archives, so make sure to subscribe to my second channel, which is linked down below to keep up with the series. Meanwhile, this is East Beach, which is obviously a really nice spot to hang. There are 2 spots where you can park for East Beach. You can park off of the street, which is free, or you can park in the parking lot, which is $5 for a day. This stretch of Cabrillo is really the best spot in town to get that laid-back beach town vibe. Cabrillo Boulevard is also where the best hotels are in Santa Barbara. You have a row of them right here along the beach. The first one that you reach when you head from east to west is the Marmonte Hotel. Past it, you have a few others before you reach the Hilton Santa Barbara Beachfront Resort, in which both the Hilton and the Marmonte are 4-star hotels. Santa Barbara is in the southern Central Coast region of California, plus it's about an hour northwest from the fringes of LA suburbia, so it's really not that far away from Los Angeles. There's an airport here, but you might find it cheaper and you might find it to be more convenient, quite frankly, to fly into LAX 2 hours south and just drive up here if you're planning on getting a rental car anyway. In my opinion, that second option beats having to wait around an airport like Seattle for a 6-hour layover, because if you're going to fly out of Santa Barbara, that's likely what's going to happen, because there aren't that many direct flights out of Santa Barbara. This place obviously has some of the best year-round weather in the country, with high temperatures rarely reaching above 90 and days in the winter months sparsely seeing highs below 60. Limiting residential and economic growth has long been a practice here, keeping Santa Barbara a smaller town by coastal California standards. And in that sense, local leadership has done a great job over the years, keeping Santa Barbara an overall quiet place to live. So yeah, there's a lot of great things about SB. Beautiful sunsets, great weather, great beaches, maybe the fanciest looking 7-Eleven that I've seen, quiet, not ugly, not trashy, low crime, no traffic, not crowded, and plus you have beautiful hiking spots in the Santa Ynez Mountains where you can get great views like this. Inspiration Point. Wow, this is incredible. Basically, a lot of the bad things that you'll see a lot of in the LA and Bay Area are not found in Santa Barbara, or at least they're found to a much lesser extent. And of course, Santa Barbara still sees the same perfect year-round weather and great scenery that can be seen in the other larger coastal California cities. So for me, those things make Santa Barbara a great place to visit. On the flip side, not everything about Santa Barbara is perfect. You know, it looks great at first glance, but just like when you go somewhere for a vacation, you can apply a spray tan to look and feel better about yourself, but after a week, it's going to be time to go back home, and the spray tan will start to fade. That's when everything goes back to reality, right? Well, yeah, spray tan, fake, not real. The idea of being able to live in Santa Barbara? Also fake. Not realistic for 99% of people. And if you spend enough time in Santa Barbara, what you're going to notice over time is that what you once thought was such a nice place will start to show its flaws. Stay in town for a week, you'll get bored. The cost of living here? Yeah, good luck with that over the long haul. Are you a beachgoer? Better load up on cooking oil. Oh, and do you think that the water is automatically going to be warm enough to swim in since Santa Barbara is somewhat Southern California-ish?
Nope.
You assume that it's going to be swimsuit weather here year-round because it never snows and it's along the Pacific Ocean?
Nope.
You better hop in the car and drive a few hours south if you want warmer water temperatures. Are you a surfer? Well, the waves here will leave you feeling greatly disappointed. Are you terrified of wildfires and earthquakes? You'll be paranoid on the daily. That's true for pretty much everywhere in California, though. Anyway, are you looking for a great food scene?
Nope.
Looking for a great nightlife?
Nope.
Looking for a sizable crowd of young professionals starting their adult life?
Nope.
Looking for a high-paying job in a competitive economy to be able to afford the cost of living in Santa Barbara?
Nope.
Do you travel a lot? Do you want access to an airport with tons of direct flights?
Nope.
So there are a lot of pros, but there's also a lot of cons. And I actually have another con to add and expand on, which would be how inaccessible the place is. It goes along with the most previous con that I mentioned with the airport in town. Unfortunately, there's no good way for most people across the country to be able to fly into the Santa Barbara airport conveniently. There are only a handful of direct flights through the Santa Barbara airport, and there are some major airports missing from the list of direct flights into Santa Barbara, such as Orlando, Chicago, and New York. Really, the best way to fly into Santa Barbara would be through a connecting flight through Denver, as there are 14 flights between Denver and Santa Barbara each day at the time of me uploading this video, and Denver has direct flights to pretty much everywhere in the country. But that can get expensive, and you could come across a potential multiple hour-long layover through connecting flights. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're someone who plans on getting a rental car anyway, you might as well fly into LAX and drive up to Santa Barbara. That way you have a larger option of flights to choose from that might better fit your schedule. The downside would be driving to Santa Barbara from LAX, which could take 2 hours. So yeah, there aren't that many great options when it comes to getting into Santa Barbara. Some people might think it's easier to spend more money on plane tickets and take the potential long layover in Denver or Seattle or wherever, whereas others, like me, might find the option to fly into LAX to better fit their schedule, and they might find it to be more affordable too. Anyway, I've happened to stay at 2 different hotels between 2 different trips to Santa Barbara within the prior 6 months of me uploading this video. Both hotels were along the stretch of Cabrillo that I just showed you, so I've spent a lot of time in this particular area of Santa Barbara. That being said, I've developed a few opinions after staying here. Among the positive opinions would be that it's a beautiful and quiet part of town to spend some time while on a vacation. My wife and I were staying here not necessarily on vacation. You know, if I was as rich as some of you so claim, I would be out there on a boat enjoying this sunset view. No question. And if I didn't have a boat, I would rent one. 100%. We were actually here to attend some events that were a part of my wife's career path, with those events being held at the conference center of 2 different hotels, both times along Cabrillo. While she was doing that, I ended up exploring Santa Barbara and filming for videos because, well, that has become my adopted career path. It was also very expensive. So, if you don't mind, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. It's much appreciated by me, and it goes a long way to help these videos. Meanwhile, there are some things to do along the beachfront area. We just passed by Stearns Wharf, which has a few nice restaurants. One of them I found to be underwhelming, whereas I really enjoyed a different one that we tried, but there really aren't that many food options along the beach. And as a visitor, I would have liked there to have been more restaurant options along the beach, but maybe a limited option is designed on purpose by the city of Santa Barbara to keep things more quiet and less crowded. It was never really super crowded when I was here. I have visited other touristy places that get really crowded, but it was never really all that crowded here in Santa Barbara. For some more food options anyway, you can walk or rent a bike and go a little bit further away towards State Street in downtown Santa Barbara. A lot of the hotels here offer bike rentals if you want to get there quicker. And Santa Barbara is a very pedestrian and bike-friendly city, so as long as you're okay with walking or biking a mile or so away and back, that really isn't too bad of an option, especially with the great scenery that you can enjoy while walking along Cabrillo. While walking along Cabrillo, you're guaranteed to see some of this: homelessness. I found the homeless in Santa Barbara, however, to overall be pretty respectful of the general public. They weren't all up in my face asking me for money, overwhelmingly so, like I found them to be in other places, such as Santa Monica further south. But I'll talk more about the homelessness in Santa Barbara later in the video. Back to the talking points is overall, I would say that Santa Barbara still lacks in a lot of amenities, despite the larger selection on State Street, so you shouldn't choose to vacation here specifically for the warm weather, the warm water to swim in, or having an abundance of things to do. For that, you might want to head further south and check out San Diego or some other beach areas in the greater Los Angeles area. If you're picking Santa Barbara, you're picking it maybe for the things to go do and see nearby, which requires a rental car or a lift to get there. Maybe you're doing it for the boating, maybe you're planning a visit out towards the Channel Islands, maybe you're looking for some great hiking spots in the mountains, or maybe you really dig the chill and quiet environment that is Santa Barbara and you don't need too many extra amenities to check out, or you don't feel the need to hop in a car and explore some of the many scenic areas nearby because the vibes that Santa Barbara brings you is exactly what you were looking for. Whatever it is, the point is that Santa Barbara is really good at offering certain things, but it's not so good at offering other things. To the right, we're passing by Santa Barbara City College, which is where no one other than Katy Perry went to school. SBCC is a community college that opened in 1909 and is among the oldest community colleges in California. I wanted to talk more about the lack of amenities in Santa Barbara proper though, as even here the city itself proudly admits to limiting non-residential growth. This article was from 2011, but in 2011, dating back to 1989, only 3 million square feet of non-residential growth had occurred within the Santa Barbara city limits, whereas allowing only 1.35 million square feet of non-residential growth was the goal set for 2030 back in 2009. The land use element document from 2011 continues to state that maintaining its historic small-town character is most definitely part and parcel of a sustainable Santa Barbara.
That makes me wonder, is referring to oneself in third person also a part of a sustainable Santa Barbara?
Basically, the lack of amenities in Santa Barbara City proper is the result of strong efforts to keep things the way that they are, as they say, over generations of time. The closest fully stocked large department store, for example, is Target, which is in the neighboring community of Goleta. There's a smaller Target store within the city, but that is also out towards Goleta, in a larger shopping area in the outskirts of town, and you have to drive a little bit if you're going to get out there from the downtown area of Santa Barbara. I mean, it's not like the city is deprived of grocery stores or anything. I mean, there's quite a few scattered throughout the original town, so it's not like it's completely deprived of retail or grocery stores, but some of the grocery stores might not have in stock what a fully stocked Target would have out towards Goleta. But anyway, in order to get to most of the shopping in the area, you have to drive 10 to 20 minutes west towards that area. Otherwise, State Street has plenty of shopping mall-like stores along its stretch, along with plenty of restaurants and eateries, but those are not necessarily stores that will have your day-to-day needs. Let's put it this way. Santa Barbara has a population of around 90,000 people. Goleta has a population of 32,000. Montecito has a population of around 9,000, and there's other populated communities surrounding the area too. So let's just say that Santa Barbara and the nearby surrounding area is a populated area of 150,000. To have only one full-size department store to serve an area of 150,000 people is not ideal. You have a Costco right by the one Target, but once again, that's about 15 to 20 minutes away from where most of the people in this region live. I know of places that are half of the size of Santa Barbara that have not only more stores, but better access to department stores that supply day-to-day needs. So yeah, you better hope that there's not a crash on the 101 when you feel the need to make a quick run to the store and try to get back home in a quick amount of time so you're not late for something else.
Hey honey, I'm gonna go run to the Target. I'm gonna try to be right back. We'll see how this goes. Don't know how traffic is on the 101.
2 hours later.
Yeah, traffic was a mess, but we have that thing now at least, but what did I miss? What? I missed the entire first half? Oh my gosh. I've been looking forward to this game all week. I'm so mad right now. They really need to build another Target closer to us.
One restriction that I like with Santa Barbara is the ban on new drive-through businesses, which was first implemented in this town 40 years ago. The reason I like it is because I absolutely hate America's obsession with fast food chains. So if I don't live within a 20-minute drive of the closest fast food restaurant, to me, that's a freaking dream. Quite frankly, the only one I ever go to is Chick-fil-A, and that just happens to be one of the few in Santa Barbara. Chick-fil-A opened up back in 2013 in place of a closed Burger King, so that's how Chick-fil-A was able to exist in Santa Barbara, because they just took over an old building that already had a drive-thru. The rule states you can't build anything new with a drive-thru, but if the building is already there and it has a drive-thru, then everything's all good and dandy. There's a few others in town that have been built before the ban was put in place and have been able to stick around this whole time. But yeah, honestly, I dig the ban on drive-thru restaurants because I think that fast food chains are the worst thing about American culture. But that's a discussion for a different day. Well, let's talk about a discussion that better suits this video. That being the economic stats for Santa Barbara. So let's get to it, shall we? Here you can see how the city has grown over the years. SB saw some huge growth in the 1920s, which was due to the oil drilling activity in the area, and we can talk about that later in the video. The only population declines in Santa Barbara's history have occurred in recent census counts, with the population seeing a peak of 92,000 back in 2000, while it's down about 7,000 since then. The latest estimates show that Santa Barbara is home to 85,000 people, with a median household income of just under $100,000 per year. 50% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $1.3 million. Lastly, the poverty rate is 13%. You can see that things look fairly similar for the county, only the median value of a home drops by $600,000. So if I were moving to the area, the thing that I would ask myself would be, is it really worth spending an extra $600,000 to live within Santa Barbara City proper? And the answer would be, nope. I mean, the weather is the same right outside of the city limits as it is inside of it, and personally, the weather would be the only reason why I would move to the area. On to the crime rates now, as the city sees a violent crime rate of 400 for every 100,000 residents and a property crime rate of 1,800-ish for every 100,000 residents. So, not terrible for California standards, a state that has seen a huge spike in crime since the pandemic. Santa Barbara appears to be safe from that spike in crime, at least for now. We'll see how things go down the road. The only thing that I want to expand upon with the economic stats would be the economy. Santa Barbara's top employers in order are UC Santa Barbara, County of Santa Barbara, Cottage Health, Procore, and Appfolio. Procore is a construction software company headquartered just south of Santa Barbara, while Appfolio is a real estate software company that is headquartered in Santa Barbara. Notable companies down the list include Sonos, also headquartered in SB, and, well, that's about it. Look, those three companies are tech companies and they offer high-paying jobs, Combined, they employ 5,400 workers, but for a county that has 440,000 people, that's not that high of a number. The real estate in this town over the years has been gobbled up by celebrities, rich people who made their money in LA, and more recently, the work-from-home enthusiasts. I was on the beach here talking with a local one day. He was in his mid-50s or so, but he mentioned how he went to school at UCSB and has stayed here ever since. He also admitted that he couldn't afford Santa Barbara 30 years ago, let alone today. But he's also glad that he bought when he did, because prices here have more than tripled over the last 30 years. I also remember him saying how the money to buy one house in SB today could buy you 3 of them 30 years ago. He also knew several people who had moved up from LA to escape all of the crap that goes along with the big city life now that they can work from home. I talked with another young couple when I was doing a hike up a mountain. They both had jobs, and they also both admitted that they couldn't afford it in Santa Barbara, but the scenery and the weather makes up for a lot of the problems that are associated with the high cost of living for them, and that's okay. They were actually from a different area of California and they just ended up there. But all of the people that I talked to off camera about this topic agreed that the economy doesn't support the extremely high cost of living in Santa Barbara. So the point is that there are not near enough high-paying jobs in the region, and I can't help but think that for that reason, that real estate values will have a long period coming up where they either stay stagnant or they might actually shrink. Kind of like how the population here has since 2000. Especially now with companies bailing on California left and right because of the outrageous taxes compared to the business climates of the other 49 states. Well, with the high cost of living and with not having enough high-paying jobs, and with the fact that we just saw someone on the sidewalk, Homeless Joe has entered the chat. We'll come back to the spot that we were in the driving tour in just a few minutes, but the problem is mostly present on the east side of town, in downtown along State Street and along Cabrillo where all of the tourists are, but
You can see homeless setting up shop in little shaded areas all along this stretch.
honestly, it's really not all that bad here. I've seen homeless people in Indianapolis, for example, be more aggressive than they are here in Santa Barbara. You can expect homelessness pretty much anywhere you go in California these days, but as you can see here, the amount of homelessness actually has not increased much at all in Santa Barbara County. It's actually decreased over the last year. This is all at the same time while other places in the state have seen their numbers skyrocket into the stratosphere. Places like San Francisco, Oakland, Fresno, Sacramento, Bakersfield, and Los Angeles, but not here in Santa Barbara. On one of my trips to Santa Barbara over the last half year, the hotel put us in a house that was apparently still a part of the hotel. Didn't feel like it, but it was several blocks away from the ocean and from the main building. I couldn't help but notice that right across the street from our makeshift Airbnb was a park that had the same people sleeping in their cars every night that I was there, and I was there for a week. Every morning they would leave and go to work, come back and camp out at this park. A few of the cars that were parked here were company vehicles, so that's how I knew that they were working. They just couldn't afford to live anywhere in this town. But like I've been mentioning throughout this video, most of the homeless here don't really cause that much trouble, so life continues to be all good and dandy. Head down to Santa Monica and it's a totally different story. Santa Monica Pier. Boy, there's all kinds of strung out weirdos around here. Well, I made it. Santa Monica, the end of Route 66. Alright, well now that you understand what it's like to live in Santa Barbara today, let's go over the history timeline, as there is a lot to go over here. Just like with most US cities along an ocean, Santa Barbara's history goes way back. As we've driven around town so far, you've likely noticed a nice collection of historic Spanish colonial revival architecture along with Mediterranean revival architecture. That being said, Santa Barbara for a long time has put in effort to preserve the original construction here, kind of like how the city has put restrictions on developments. Well, there's also a height limit that they strictly follow, and it's paid off nicely. As you can see, the town looks pretty unique. I know earlier I complained about some of the restrictions that have been put into place here in Santa Barbara, but now I'm talking about the pros of it. So all of that, along with the year-round perfect 70-degree weather, along with the amazing ocean and mountain scenery, all of that has helped Santa Barbara become one of the premier tourist destinations in the United States. The collection of buildings here really provide a unique vibe to Santa Barbara that you won't see in other Southern California coastal cities. So, modern history of Santa Barbara goes all the way back to 1542, even though documentation of this area goes back a long way before then. But during this year in 1542, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sailed along what is known today as the Santa Barbara Channel, so that's who Cabrillo Boulevard is named after. Cabrillo was a Portuguese explorer and is credited for being the first European explorer of Santa Barbara. Before European settlement, it was the Chumash Indians that occupied much of the coastal and mountainous areas of California, from modern-day San Luis Obispo all the way down towards Los Angeles. So Santa Barbara was right in the heart of Chumash Indian land. In 1602, the name Santa Barbara was given to this area based off of a Spanish voyage that took place on December 4th of that year, as that very same day was the Roman Catholic feast day of Saint Barbara, and the name has stuck around for over 400 years. However, it wasn't until the 1780s when a modern settlement was founded. The site for a mission in what we know today as Santa Barbara was approved in 1780 by this guy, who was the Commandant General of the Interior Provinces. Spanish missions were a big part of early civilization in California in what was originally New Spain, or Alta California, which was a part of the expansion of the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire was Catholic-based and, of course, governed by Spain. The missions throughout California were founded by the Spanish Empire to expand their religious beliefs, culture, and obviously, their empire. When this group first came to Santa Barbara to start establishing the new community, the Chumash Indians had a small encampment along the beach near where Mission Creek empties into the Santa Barbara Channel, or where Stearns Wharf is today. The first building in town was the Santa Barbara Presidio. Construction on it began in 1784. It actually still stands today at the corner of Canon Perdido and Santa Barbara Streets. The property today is a state park, and in it, you can get a good idea of what an old Spanish fort was like in the late 1700s. When constructed, the Presidio housed soldiers and was one of only 4 military fortresses in all of California at the time. A few years later, the formal founding of Mission Santa Barbara was on December 4th, 1786, in honor of Saint Barbara's passing on December 4th. Saint Barbara was one of 14 Holy Helpers, a group of saints who are venerated together by the Catholic faith because of their intercession against various diseases, especially at the hour of death. But despite the mission being founded officially, construction on buildings at the site of the new mission didn't occur until after 6 months had passed. It said that that was a period of unusually heavy rains. Throughout the rest of the 1700s, the settlement continued to grow, as did other nearby missions, such as San Luis Obispo, which isn't that far north. During this time, Chumash Indians were being converted into Catholicism, with the 1000th baptism of a Chumash Indian occurring at Mission Santa Barbara in 1796. By 1800, the area southwest of the Mission Quadrangle, or the Mission Campus, was a community that was starting to get built. There were around 50 houses, 3 churches, 3 granaries, a cemetery, a vineyard, and an orchard that had all been built. At the same time, the original grid streets that we're driving on right now were starting to take shape. Also in 1800, the first documented earthquake occurred, causing only minor damage to the buildings. Other earthquakes, however, occurred in 1811 and 1812, with the one in 1812 causing significant damage to the community. Throughout the first half of the 1800s, agricultural trades were crucial for the mission to be able to continue to grow, as in 1811, Mexico stopped trading goods to California. That wasn't a problem here, though, as Mission Santa Barbara continued to thrive. People from out east were starting to inhabit the area too, as an American settler from Massachusetts Daniel Hill built the first wooden floor in a Santa Barbara home back in 1828. That house still stands today and is known as Carrillo Adobe. During the 1830s, the original intent for Santa Barbara to be a Catholic mission started to fade. Other non-native inhabitants like Daniel Hill started to move into the area, with as many as 900 of them populating the town by 1840. In 1846, war was declared between Mexico and the U.S., with the commander of American forces in California, Robert Stockton, capturing control over Santa Barbara in August of that year. Mexico was able to capture Santa Barbara in October, but America recaptured the old mission 2 months later. In 1848, California was officially in American territory. The first American school opened in 1849. The California Gold Rush was also in the beginning stages during this time, as population of California started to explode, and Santa Barbara saw some of that growth, despite it being pretty far away from the gold mines near Sacramento. The population of California grew so much that it was able to become the 31st state of the Union on September 9, 1850, despite there being a large land gap between California and the next state to the east, that being Texas, which was over 450 miles away. Santa Barbara also officially became a city that year on April 9th. The following year, in 1851, the city of Santa Barbara was surveyed and streets were officially laid out for the town by Captain Salisbury Haley, who has a street named after him in the lower part of town. Santa Barbara saw its first newspaper in 1853. A few years later, in 1855, the mission at Santa Barbara saw its first renovation as an apostolic college started to occupy the space. Spanish was elected as the official language of Santa Barbara in 1864, only for English to be declared as such in 1870. In 1872, Stearns Wharf was constructed at the end of State Street, and also that year, the first volunteer fire department began operation. Obviously, there's a lot of history from the ancient times and from the 17 to 1800s that I just can't get to in this video because there's just so much of it, but that's the brief overlay of some of the key moments in Santa Barbara's early history. Now on to some of the more modern history, as there are two notable topics to go over that stand out with Santa Barbara. The first one being oil drilling. When I first came to Santa Barbara, I didn't know anything about the oil drilling history of this area. That being said, I couldn't help but notice a giant oil slick that I didn't get a video of, unfortunately, in the Pacific Ocean the first time that I was able to see the ocean when I was in town. At the time, I remember thinking, oh, that's probably just from a ship or your typical ocean pollution that could be found anywhere, but that was me being naive. I also ended up getting beach tar stuck on my feet after spending some time walking up and down one of the beaches in the area. And you will too, possibly, if you ever come visit. In 1886, natural gas and crude oil was first extracted from the Santa Barbara Channel, providing jobs and industry to the area. In fact, the first offshore wells for oil drilling in the United States were developed just east of Santa Barbara in the area known as Summerland. The wells were built on piers that extended several hundred feet out into the ocean. Many of these offshore wells were built in the area around the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During that time, oil drilling was unregulated, so companies were able to do as they pleased without a care in the world, and that's exactly what they did. Now, when it comes to the oil blotches that often appear in the water in Santa Barbara, there are two different ways that oil can pollute the ocean, one being an oil spill, the other being an oil seepage. An oil spill being man-made, oil seep being natural. Back in the day, the Chumash Indians actually took advantage of the oil seeps by using the tar that washed up on the shore as a sealer of handcraft boats and rafts that they would construct, so that's pretty neat. Anyway, nearby, Santa Paula is the location that California refers to as being the first out-of-control oil gusher, and that is east of Santa Barbara. At the time, there wasn't enough storage to keep all of the oil that was coming to the surface, so as much as 1,500 barrels of oil were released per day into the Santa Clara River, which then emptied into the Pacific Ocean. Additionally, many of the first offshore wells that were constructed very poorly. Over time, these poorly constructed offshore wells became abandoned, and storms would damage their integrity, which caused quite a few oil spills into the Santa Barbara Channel. This caused California in 1915 to implement their first laws governing oil well abandonment to prevent them from becoming a bigger issue. This law would force companies to be responsible to take care of their oil wells once they were done using them. In 1960, oil drilling saw its peak activity in Santa Barbara County as the channel had some of the richest deposits of oil in the Western Hemisphere. In 1969, however, a major spill occurred, releasing 3.2 million gallons of crude oil into the Santa Barbara Channel. This received a large public outcry, and this encouraged California to ban new leases for offshore drilling in state-owned waters. This even helped a national movement to better protect the environment by reducing man-made pollution. More recently, however, despite there being much less oil drilling activity today than there used to be, there was the 2015 pipeline spill at Refugio State Beach nearby that saw national attention. But let's say that none of this man-made activity ever occurred. Let's say that there was never an oil spill here, and let's say that there was never any oil drilling here. Let's say there wasn't even an oil pipeline here. If that were the case, there would still be oil washing up on the shores of Santa Barbara's beaches, although at a much lower rate. The reason why that would be is because of the fractures that have occurred naturally within the ocean floor across the Santa Barbara Channel. Oil seepages, however, are much less polluting than the man-made spills are, as the seepages flow very slowly and much of the chemicals within the oil gets filtered through the water. However, today, whenever oil washes up on the shore, it's difficult to tell whether it's from a man-made oil spill or if it's from natural seepages. Moving on to the next notable modern history topic would be the filmmaking industry's presence in the Santa Barbara area. Before Hollywood took off, Santa Barbara, for a brief time, was the larger filmmaking hotbed between it and Hollywood. Originally, the filmmaking industry was developed in New York City. Industry leaders, however, wanted to relocate to an area with a better climate, as technology with camera equipment was in the very early stages and it was difficult to film in the harsh winters of the Northeast. Once filmmakers moved to Southern California, supply and demand took off for filmmaking across the nation. Of course, it didn't hurt that Southern California had some of the best natural scenery in the country for backdrops for films, ranging from oceans to forests to mountains to desert landscapes, all while having ideal weather conditions mostly every day throughout the year. Well, Santa Barbara was home to what was called Flying A Studios, which was the world's largest movie studio upon completion in 1913. The trademark was owned by the American Film Manufacturing Company, which began in Chicago in 1910 before relocating to Santa Barbara. The company ended up producing 1,200 silent films before shuttering in 1922. Within that brief time, however, Santa Barbara was said to have been the film capital of the world from 1912 to 1919. Among the star actresses of Flying A was Audrey Munson, who shocked the world by appearing nude in a film and is credited for being the first nude movie star, also for being the first supermodel. There's a couple of landmarks from that era of Santa Barbara's history that still stand today, one being the Edgerly Apartments Hotel, where many of the actors and actresses would hang out. The building was constructed in 1913, but today, the building serves as a senior living center, so no museum inside. Flying A specialized in mass production of short 24 to 30-minute films, as that's what was popular during the 1910s. It's also noted that it would only take a few hours out of the day for Flying A to be able to produce a complete product of some of their films. Over time, Flying A never adapted to the growing demand of longer films that were produced with more quality, like what was going on in Hollywood, so that led to the closure of Flying A's Santa Barbara studios in 1921. With its parent company disappearing for good in 1922. The filmmaking industry still has a presence in Santa Barbara today, and clearly, the scenery continues to provide a great environment for filmmakers. As many of you probably know, it's a popular area for production companies in Hollywood to capture footage, with the most popular films that were shot in Santa Barbara being 1983's Scarface, 2011's No Strings Attached, and 1992's Of Mice and Men, and the 1966 film Batman the Movie. Before I move on entirely from talking about the history, one of the main historical facts that I left out was that the oldest skeletal remain that has ever been found in the Western Hemisphere was found on the Channel Islands, and some of the other archaeological artifacts that have been found in the area over the years are on display at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. Well, people, it is now that time. What did we learn in this video? We learned that you couldn't always trust oil drilling companies in the 1960s, and you can't always trust a Santa Barbara hippie, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. The first category is education. Santa Barbara High School performs well academically with scores coming in higher than the state averages in all three categories, math, reading, and science. The schools aren't bad at all in Santa Barbara, and those who try in school usually do well here and can go on to a preferred college of their choice, if that's the route that they want to go. Education gets a 17 out of 20. Crime is not an issue in Santa Barbara, really, especially when compared to the other California cities. However, it is in California, and some things here, unfortunately, have been decriminalized. The state has also made it tough for police to be able to do their jobs, like do things like, arrest criminals for committing crimes. If those crimes are not considered to be felonies, it's really hard for police to do their jobs. In some cases, police aren't even allowed to pursue an arrest of a criminal doing something if it's something as simple as breaking into a car. That being said, crime gets a 13 out of 20. If it wasn't in California, it would probably get a 16 out of 20. Next up is downtown, and downtown Santa Barbara is cool and unique, no doubt, although businesses have been leaving slowly but consistently over the past few years due to an overall decline in business and overall higher lease rates. There's definitely an identity to downtown Santa Barbara though, and a nice one at that. It gets a 16 out of 20. Economy is next, and I can't give the economy a good score for Santa Barbara. The area thrives off of tourism, but once again, there just aren't near enough high-paying jobs in the region to support the high cost of living. Plus, I just mentioned the small businesses that are continuing to leave downtown Santa Barbara. Now, if home values shrunk down by, 70%, and maybe the state imposed a tax break, the economy score would be higher, but I have to give it a 6 out of 20. Next up is recreational opportunities, and that's an easy 20 out of 20. It's easily Santa Barbara's best trait. You can do pretty much anything that you want from a recreational standpoint in the area. If not here, you can likely find what you're looking for nearby. History is next, and the history of the area is rich. It's among the richest history in all of California for a city, and it's been preserved extremely nicely in Santa Barbara over the years. History gets an 18 out of 20. Next up is amenities, and you know how I feel about that based on what I mentioned earlier. Amenities gets an 8 out of 20. That had to have been the most disappointing thing to me about Santa Barbara when I visited. Sure, there are plenty of restaurant options in the downtown area, and it's not necessarily deprived of amenities, but also the city clearly lacks in amenities, and it's one of the biggest gripes about the area, not only by me, but by many others as well. State Street is a saving grace from keeping that score being any lower. Well, last, it's the category that you've all been waiting for, the cost of living score, and this is the first time that I'm going to implement this type of score into the Chris livability score. That type of score being a negative number. I'm giving it a -2 because It truly is not realistic for most people to be able to live in Santa Barbara. If you do have the money to live here, however, and the idea of paying half of your gross income in taxes doesn't bother you, then go right ahead and live in Santa Barbara because there's a lot of things to enjoy here, no doubt. All in all, the Chris Livability score for Santa Barbara, California is 96 out of 160, placing it in a 5-way tie for 11th place out of all of the cities that I've done this for so far. So, to answer the question, is Santa Barbara the most overrated city? I would say yes and no, because in a lot of ways, Santa Barbara lives up to the hype. In a lot of other ways, it can be very underwhelming. If you're a travel enthusiast, it is worth seeing Santa Barbara at least one time, no doubt, but I don't know if it's worth it to keep coming back here. I also don't think that the high cost of living here is justified despite the perfect scenery and near perfect weather year-round. Not only just for people who live in Santa Barbara, but for tourists like myself as well. There's plenty of other ocean communities in the country that you can visit for less money, specifically out east. It's unfortunate what politics have done to the state of California too, because being located in the state of California might be Santa Barbara's biggest flaw, one that it obviously can't control. The policies that the state of California have implemented over the recent few years gives not only Santa Barbara an uncertain future, but also pretty much every city in this state, as the mass California exodus continues, which is mostly blamed on a seemingly never-ending increase in cost of living and, more recently, spikes in crime. Well, to see other videos within my upcoming Santa Barbara playlist, make sure to subscribe to my second channel called Chris Harden's Travel Archives, where I will upload the rest of the videos within this series. And depending on the time that you've watched this video, all 5 might or might not be listed within that playlist. You can also check out my Tourist Towns playlist here to see other places like Santa Barbara. Peace!